Well, welcome to Investor in the Family Radio. My name is Brian Bain, and I'm your host. And thank you so much for joining us here today. And I am, again, like in the last few episodes, joined with my special guest, David Reyes. David, say hello.
Hello, hello.
Awesome. And you remember that David is 26 and 3/4 years old, and he's joining us. He is new at investing, and it's just excited to learn more about the subject. And so I've invited David to join us here on the show as we work through Warren Buffett's letters to shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway. We've been going through these letters. We started back in 1965, way back last summer of 2017. And today we took a little break, and now we're back in today is 1972. So it feels weird to say that. It feels like I'm like really confused about the clock, but I mean, we're covering the 1972 letter.
It's a good year.
It's a good year. You know, I will tell you, my first vehicle was a 1972 Ford F-100 pickup truck.
Wow. I bet that thing lasted for a good while too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was driving it in the 90s, so I mean, it was over 20 years old. And the reason it lasted for a long time is because it was my grandfather's, and that man took good care of stuff.
Wow.
And for him, you know, he never drove, so that helped too.
So that's true. No miles.
Yeah. So there's our little ode to 1972. And what did I want to do before we got started? Oh, I wanted to remind everyone, investorinthefamily.com. That's the website. And we'll be putting these episodes, they're not up there right now, but the previous ones from 65 up to, I think, 1970 are on the website and have been for a while. And we will be loading the 1971 Moving Forward podcast, hopefully soon. Maybe by the time you've heard this, they'll already be posted, so you can listen to those and stuff. And as always, would love to hear from you. You can email me at Brian, Brian, at investorinthefamily.com with any feedback or thoughts you have. Read all those emails and look forward to seeing them. But you know what? That's enough for today. Enough intro for today. Let's go ahead and jump into the letter. And David, I'm going to start by putting you on the spot. And because before we started recording, we were talking about what to look for when reading these letters. Because again, we mentioned, obviously, you're newer to investing, so you may not see the same things that someone more experienced may see. So that being said, I'm curious if you remember when you first read the 1972 letter, did anything stand out to you? Any questions that stood out? Or did it just kind of seem like, what is this guy talking about and why should I be interested?
I think it definitely took me a couple reads to kind of get an understanding of some things. I mean, obviously, knowing that these are letters to shareholders, it's not just for, you know, the everyday reader. It's like, hey, here's some things. But I think, you know, like we had talked about before, is kind of looking at things like, okay, how is Warren Buffett leading in this business? How is he kind of growing in this? And so kind of looking from stuff like that has been really helpful. There were some things that he said, like one of the things where he talked about, like right on the first of the letter, he talked about, he said, our three major acquisitions of recent years have all worked out exceptionally well from both the financial and human standpoints. And that just sentence stuck out to me because I was like, okay, that's something I know, like I'm a human, I know. And so like when you look at, because you're just, you know, you're looking at all these numbers and it's good to kind of see the growth patterns and stuff. But it's also, and kind of we talked about before, it's like sometimes there's kind of the emotion side of investing as well. And people kind of can freak out and kind of do all these things. But I did think that was interesting. It's like, hey, he's taking lessons from, hey, this is from a good human standpoint. It's a good financial standpoint, understanding, hey, these are the individuals that have made significant increases for our business. And it's been cool what they've been doing. So I love his affirmation. I think that's one of the first things I noticed is he's very affirming in this letter of the people, and even the last letters of his the people that's helping run this for him.
Absolutely. No, and I'm really glad that you saw that. And, you know, as we read these letters, we continue to reinforce the mindsets behind that come out of the letters that I believe that Warren Buffett used to build Berkshire Hathaway. Because again, the idea, one of the things I think about with these podcasts is when I read, I'm trying not to be too over the map right now. My mind can be scattered sometimes, but all these things come together, I promise. So right now, I've mentioned before, I'm holding a book called The Intelligent Investor, written by a man named Benjamin Graham. And Warren Buffett, he's got a quote on here that says, by far the best book on investing ever written. Okay, so obviously if you want to learn about investing, it seems like, well, if one of the most respected investors of all time, says this is the best investment book ever written, maybe I should pay attention. But the reason I bring it up right now, obviously it ties in because Warren Buffett speaks so highly of it, but he writes a preface to the book. And if anyone has been listening to me or following me for any period of time, you've heard me say this so many times, but I'm going to keep saying it, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. He has this quote at the very beginning of his preface. To invest successfully over a lifetime does not require a stratospheric IQ, unusual business insights, or inside information. What's needed is two things, is a sound intellectual framework for making decisions and the ability to keep emotions from corroding that framework. And so you just mentioned the emotional side of things. And, I think, and I lose track now sometimes what we've said when, but I think even in one of the recent podcasts, we mentioned the idea of budgeting, so, and how almost everyone will agree that having a budget is a good idea. It makes sense. But if people are honest, probably very few people actually have a budget and keep it up to date. And then of those who do have a budget, I'm sure a very small percentage of those actually adhere to it and hold themselves accountable to it.
Right.
And so the same concept with investing, I think if we actually are willing to identify some kind of a sound framework for investing, and there's lots of different ways that can look, in my opinion, and then we're willing to stick to it, I think we immediately differentiate ourselves from almost all other investors around us.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think budget is one of the first things, when I got married, I just realized I am terrible at this. When I was just by myself, you didn't have anyone to care for. And I think, what you're doing here with Investor in the Family, and kind of running your family as a business, these are now just like Warren Buffett had his shareholders that he was writing these letters to. I feel like we have our family that we're, holding ourselves accountable to. Cause I just remember there was moments, when I was just by myself, not really worrying. I just was kind of just day to day, didn't really care. And then I finally sat down to do my budget and realized, wow, I am so off on so many things. And it's just because you're not looking at it. And so, I think that's so true.
Well, and one of the services we offer here at Investor in the Family is called Portfolio Mastery Course, or PMC for short. And the whole idea behind it is to help really reinforce a lot of these mindsets we talk about here from Buffett, but then help people actually walk through practical steps of actualizing those things for themselves personally, all the way through building out a portfolio to help meet their financial investment goals. But part of that stuff is actually being disciplined to do this stuff on the budget side, but then also on the portfolio side. And people, it's not fun to do because of what you just said. Even on the investment side, it's not fun to sit down and take a real assessment of your brokerage account and see, okay, how has this actually, under my management, how has my portfolio actually performed? And it's, I think for a lot of people, it's really sobering and almost kind of painful. So you want to avoid it. But, again, a lesson from these letters, when Buffett bought Berkshire Hathaway, the textile industry and this company were not in good shape, but he didn't ignore it. He didn't write it off. He leaned into it and took responsibility. And over years and years, we started in 65 and now this is 72, 7 years, is working to figure out how do we right this ship. In the meantime, how can we, build other healthy, revenue engines as well, which again, some of the reasons why I have so much respect for these very disciplined processes that he has.
Well, do we know, and this is just maybe trying to get a history lesson here, but I'm just curious with obviously Warren Buffett before Berkshire Hathaway, did he have a lot of this knowledge coming into this where it was kind of when he took this over, he kind of knew, or do you feel like he kind of grew? Obviously, you reading a lot of these letters, do you feel like he kind of grew over time in these processes, or do you feel like it was just already very exceptional when he took it over?
It's probably a combination of all the above, to be honest. And it's an excellent question because obviously we're coming in 65, and obviously Warren Buffett didn't just start from zero in 65. He had a pre-existing, he had enough of a company to be able to purchase this one. So he had assets. He was managing money before this, and he actually has other letters he wrote before this to his I think he had actually I need to go back and read some of this myself to refresh myself. A little embarrassed I don't have this more readily available, but he was like running some kind of a partnership where he was investing money and through that purchased this company. So he was already in business before, already had some investment and some business experience, which is, I think, kind of laid some of the groundwork for, him doing things well like he did here. But there's no doubt, I think he's learning a lot in the process as well, because I think there's a lot of things here that are new for him, but they make sense based upon the experience that he has as an investor already, because he's running this business as an investor. And I think that's why you see, early on the letters, once you realize, okay, this textile company is not performing very well. We have extra capital. I'm not putting that extra money back into a business that's not going to perform well. I'm going to put this money somewhere where it's going to give me a good return. That's thinking like an investor, whereas most business owners wouldn't think that way. And again, and then coming back to that quote I shared from Buffett a while ago, as far as the two things you need, a sound intellectual framework and then the ability to keep your emotions from corroding that framework. I feel like one of the core, I hope this podcast will help people build out and shape their intellectual framework without question. And that's definitely, that would be a huge win. But honestly, I feel like one of the biggest values this podcast can offer is that second point, to help protect people from the emotional obstacles that will cause them downfall. And really, so, I mean, my hope is that this regular podcast would be like a renewing of the mind, because we're always, falling prey to greed, fear, impatience, then all the media and dynamics around us are always, making us want to take action quickly. And I fall prey to it because, I want to open my portfolio, open my phone once a day and see how things are performing and so on. And all that makes me want to take more and more action. And historically, the less action we can take as investors, usually the better we perform. And so hopefully this podcast will help us to kind of work out some of our investment energy and kind of serve as a filter for us and our listeners from emotions that could potentially, sabotage our investments.
Yeah, that's a good point. Glad you mentioned that.
Well, let's go ahead and jump into the letter itself. And, I've got a bunch of underlines and stuff, and we've got some notes here to talk through. And again, for everyone listening, we're working through it's a book by Max Olson. There's a guy named Max Olson who put together all these letters, and it's really the best source I know to be able to have all the letters in one spot. So that's kind of what we're working through here. But a couple of things that stand out to me from this letter, or stood out to me from this letter when I first read it. First of all, the very first line says, operating earnings of Berkshire Hathaway during 1972 amounted to a highly satisfactory 19.8% of beginning shareholders' equity. And that is astounding. Again, I think we mentioned this last time we recorded, but it has actually blown me away. Recently, I've been playing with some retirement calculators and, just looking at, okay, what returns would be required for X amount of dollars to become so much in the future and all that kind of stuff. And it just was mind blowing to me, the difference that 1% makes year after year. Like, for example, if you return 10% per year on your investments versus 11%, you think, oh, that's not that big of a deal. It is dramatic, the difference. And we're already almost 15 minutes into the show, so I won't spend a lot of time pulling up some calculators right now. Maybe we'll do that on a side episode sometime in the future. But it is, it can be the difference between running out of money in retirement at the age of 72 versus having millions of dollars left over at the age of 90. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I remember, us talking about that in the last podcast, and I started thinking more and more about that. And you just I think now you look at it and you're like, no, it's so easy to, like you said, to think about 1% difference. You don't really think about it too much. But then when you start literally forecasting, mapping things out, seeing how it affects, and I think even learning lessons from, Berkshire Hathaway, I don't know. It's just crazy to think through how much you can accumulate, I guess, through that.
Well, and to know that if someone says, again, you think, oh, okay, if, say the S&P, the markets return 10% 1 year, or on average return 9 to 10% year after year, generally speaking. And then you hear about someone who has a hedge fund or some kind of an investment firm that historically averaged 16%. You think, oh, that's only 6% different. That doesn't sound like a big deal at all. But the difference between 10 to 16 is just absolutely, it's just unbelievably astounding. again, it would be way more, much more impact for our listeners if I pulled the calculator up, but I won't do that right now. But the point is 19.8% return on one year is amazing, but historically we know that Berkshire Hathaway averages that amount throughout most of the history of the firms under the management of Warren Buffett, which is one of the reasons why he's so well regarded as an investor. And so I just wanted to bring up that number at the very beginning is, I mean, you think of any sports, like amazing all-time statistic lifetime number, and that's what this is like, you know, whether it be, you know, whatever you want that to be. We'll leave that alone for now. And so I want to read this quote that comes up fairly early on here. And he says, your present management assumed, let me see. Where am I? Okay. Yeah. So this is the second paragraph here. I'll read it. Your present management assumed policy control of the company in May 1965. 8 years later, our 1972 operating earnings of $11,116,000 represent a return many-fold higher than would have been produced had we continued to devote our resources entirely to the textile business. And that's reinforcing what we said a while ago, the idea that, you know, he ran this business as an investor and realized, hey, we can get a much higher return on our money if we put this money to use elsewhere. We know that he purchased insurance companies and some banks and a newspaper and a few other things in the years that followed. And so again, as investors, having that mindset, realize that he was running a business, but he ran the business like an investor. Most of us think of ourselves as maybe do-it-yourself investors or retail investors. And so we're thinking, hey, I'm investing, but I want to flip that around too, kind of opposite of Warren Buffett, in the sense that we need to realize that we are running a business with our investing. Yeah. And like the two sides of the same coin. Like if Buffett would have just viewed his as a business, he would have missed out significantly on the future of the business. And for ourselves, if we just view our investing as investment activities, we are dramatically underestimating the potential of what we can build, versus if we viewed our investment work as an actual business itself. Like this is an actual entrepreneurial activity that we are undergoing by investing and managing our family's investments.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think I find that so fascinating. You know, just the way like he led through that as himself as an investor. And I know we keep coming back to that, but I really think like he just was, I feel like ahead of his time, ahead of where he knew he wanted to be. He had a good forecast, a good way, a good plan. I don't know. It's very apparent in that way.
Well, and patience as well. I mean, you think again, we think about, again, one of the biggest things that destroys investors is overactivity. You know, we buy something and then we get impatient, or we read an article about a stock that sounds really promising and we get excited and then we buy that one. And then, you know, a month later we read another article, we get excited about that one, and we buy that one. And then a few months pass by and that first one we bought, we think, well, nothing's happened on that yet. I thought something would happen by now. Then we sell it and buy another opportunity. And, you know, honestly, like it's, you know, actually I debated off air, because I think about this stuff a lot, is probably not surprising. But I've debated about how firmly I want to speak against activity like that. And before I say this, I want to make it clear, like I am 100% guilty of doing exactly what I just said. I'm not proud of it, and I do it way less than I used to, but it still does happen occasionally. Used to happen a lot when I was a little earlier on and younger. But I think about like, and I say this carefully, what I'm about to say is, I'm not calling anyone stupid or dumb. Yeah. I'm calling our activities and actions dumb. Like, to do what I just said is just dumb as an investor. You know, again, exceptions maybe if you have some kind of a really well thought out strategy that involves trading on short-term basis and it's working, then more power to you. I will say that almost no one does. And so if you think you do, I encourage you to audit your work and find out if you actually do have a successful strategy by doing that. But by and large, almost with very little exception, the less activity we can have as investors, the better. And to do what I said a while ago of jumping in and jumping out, not having a clear plan, it's just dumb. It's just dumb. It doesn't mean you're a dumb person, but it's dumb activity because it's completely undermining the benefit of investing, which is time.
Yeah. And I think it's a lot of discipline too, which is another thing we've talked about before, but just how hard that discipline is, especially when your emotions start playing into it. And I think you getting into like some stoicism or something like that, I guess, but it's just, I don't know, it's just like you see your discipline and this emotion is getting into play, and sometimes it could really mess you up, I feel like. And I feel like Warren Buffett in this time, he really had this well thought out plan with he kind of knew what he was doing, and it's a good thing to learn from, I guess.
Well, and again, I'll read this next quote I've listed here. It says, our three major acquisitions of recent years have all worked out exceptionally well from both the financial and human standpoints, which was something you actually read earlier. But the point I wanted to highlight from this is the fact that he says three. That word three is what matters to me from that sentence. In recent years, three major acquisitions. So again, as individual investors, how many stocks, and I know that you're not actively investing currently right now, but for anyone listening, how many stocks did you buy in the last year? And I'm talking to myself because it was a lot more than three. And I have to ask, so why are we in such a hurry? And again, Warren Buffett was making, these are major acquisitions. He's buying companies. Okay. And so we don't think, part of it as investors, we don't think, well, I'm not buying, I'm not buying Apple. I'm buying like 3 shares of Apple, or, however many it may be, or something like that. But so we think it lightly and think, oh, it's not that much money, or it's a small amount of money or a small percentage of my portfolio. And I get it. I understand that as DIY investors, it's not realistic for us to go as deep research wise for every investment we make as Warren Buffett would have done for full on companies he was outright buying. I understand that, but then again, let's challenge that. And I'll say, well, why not? Why? The popular convention is that, a well-diversified portfolio is going to have at least 20 or 25 stocks in it. Okay. So that means, out of 100%, that means you're going to have anywhere from, 2.5 to, wait, did I do my math right? Anywhere from, what did I just do? Oh, okay. Anywhere from 2.5 to 5% in any position. So if you have 25 positions, that's, 4%. Yeah, anywhere from 4 to 5, at max 5% in any one position. That was really embarrassing on the air live math. But you shouldn't have any more, based upon that, if you're being really strict mathematically, no more than 5% in any one position. But in most cases, even less than that. If you had 50 positions, it could be 2.5%. So when you do that, you think, well, that's 20 to 30 plus different companies to research and to buy. And the popular convention is you want to diversify and have at least that many, because that way, if any one of those companies performs really poorly or worst case scenario goes bankrupt, then it's not going to completely destroy your financial future. That's the idea. Right. And there's good thinking behind that, obviously, because, you want to protect, your portfolio. But the thing is, by doing that, you're also dramatically limiting your returns and the ability to make money as well. Because the fewer companies you invest in, then you have the chance you can do much better with those, because if you have one company that does really well and you invest in 30 companies, it's only going to impact a small portion of your portfolio. But you have one company that performs really well and you have like 5 or 10 companies, then you're going to see a lot more money or appreciation of your portfolio come out of that. And again, but the thing is, the less diversified we are in our portfolios, the more disciplined and painstaking we must be in our picks, because again, the rewards are higher, but the risk is higher too. And so, that's why I say here with Buffett, he says our 3 major acquisitions, just thinking, what if we had the same mindset? What if we thought, I'm going to try to find one like amazing investment or 2 amazing investments every year. And I'm going to have very, very strict criteria, and I'm not going to make an investment until those criteria are met. And then when I do make it, I can sit on it for 10 years knowing that I made an amazing investment.
Yeah, that I feel like, what is that? Would you say that's a pretty common, I wouldn't say a mistake, but would you say that's a pretty common thing that happens, like in investing, like to where they're looking at that and they're like, no, it's not. I mean, not these 3 acquisitions or these one, like you were saying, 1 really good one, 2 really good one. But do you feel, is that a common thread that happens?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think that, again, there are always going to be some exceptional people that,
Mm-hmm.
observe some of those practices and will have the discipline that I mentioned. But I mean, based upon, I mean, I've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews, like audio interviews, written interviews, and all that kind of stuff. So I've read a lot of stuff from professional investors, from DIY investors like us and our listeners. And without question, the vast majority of people do not show that kind of discipline. I think the norm for most people is overactivity and not really diving deep and really having a strong buy and sell filter. Basically before you have a very strong filter before you buy any asset and a really strong filter before you sell. If someone can just show the patience to wait and do that, I think the rewards are, I mean, not undeniable. I can't make guarantees, but I think that anyone who does that will have a much, much more successful investing career than those who don't. And as I say that, honestly, it's convicting for me because I struggle here as well because it comes down to, well, what are my criteria going to be? Like what are the criteria going to be in order to invest with that kind of precision and discipline? And then, man, how much time is that going to take? And I mean, there's all kinds of challenges that come with that. And those are very real questions to ask. And those are things that, I'm wrestling through as well. And again, I mentioned the training I mentioned earlier, Portfolio Mastery course. We also have a membership site, Capital Allocation Mastery. And the whole purpose one of the purposes behind it is to address things like this as well. And we're working through together, what does it look like to tackle these questions and to be able to really, build a sound framework and then stick to it. And what are all the bells and whistles that come around that to support that kind of a investment discipline? And we get into lots of like specific investments as well. But so as I'm, managing that service, I'm challenged for myself. Okay, I'm leading other people in these decisions or my decisions, and they're watching basically. It ups my accountability tremendously in terms of how am I going to discipline myself and what are my buying criteria going to be? And I'm still working through it. I've got a list of stuff, but, I'm honestly not fully satisfied with where I'm at there either. But, the whole point is I'm still pressing into it and, and growing. So.
And that is interesting because, coming from the outside looking in, I would look at that and be like, okay, yeah, that just seems doable. It seems like I could do that. And so by that not being common and you're looking at like, so much more and the discipline being carried away, it seems crazy. It seems overwhelming, but I get what you're saying is when you're kind of in that mode, what are your filters? What is that thing? It is interesting, how that happens, but that's fascinating to me.
Well, and again, and I think a lot of times it can even be more simple than we make it out to be. In reality, if we have the right filters in place, there's probably, 5 boxes that we could check and be like, okay, then this is I'm comfortable making an investment in this company based upon these 5 criteria being in place. And then you can make the investment and just sit on it and you don't sell until something changes.
Yeah.
And again, but I think the way I view it is the less positions we're going to hold, the less diversified we're going to be, the more, the deeper our analysis and greater conviction we have to have in the investment. And that greater conviction usually comes with greater study and understanding and stuff as well. Let me jump through. There are a few highlights I want to bring out here. And, I'm again, live decision making here. I'm sitting here thinking we're almost at 30 minutes and we're barely into the letter. I'm wondering if we should punt and do the rest of this in a different episode or not. Let me see here. So let me jump through a few highlights here and then I think we'll be able to jump into the new letter. He says, we will, kind of going through some highlights I've got here. He says, we will continue to search for logical extensions of our present operations and also for new operations, which will allow us to continually employ our capital effectively. And again, I think this is like a theme or mantra for all of us. Like our mindset should continuously be, we are allocators of capital. We are looking to allocate capital wherever it's going to be used, provide the best, be treated best, and provide the best possible return for us. Okay, let me see. I'm going to jump through here real quick. let's go ahead and wrap up now, because I don't want to fire hydrant these things through here, and maybe we'll bring up a few things in the next episode, and then move on to 73 letter. But I want to wrap it up with that idea that, he says, we will continue to search for logical extensions of our present operations, and also for new operations, which will allow us to continue to employ our capital effectively. And I said this should be a theme or mantra for all of us. Again, it's like, where will capital be treated best? We are portfolio managers. We are allocators of capital. And actually, I had a friend of mine over the other day who has his own investing podcast, and he's had a long career as a very successful investor. And we're talking about this very idea, the idea of where will capital be treated best. And our whole job is in reframing that mindset, because I think so many of us, I love the phrase DIY investor because that's what we are, and that's how I, refer to a lot of my listeners. But I almost don't like it either, because the reality is we need to view ourselves as business owners. We are allocators of capital. We are portfolio managers, and we need to view ourselves and what we're doing with that level of seriousness in order to really steward well our family's financial futures.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, it all goes back to me like self-evaluation. There's got to be so much self-evaluation, anything you do. But just in hearing, kind of some of these highlights from this letter, there has to be this continued self-evaluation and continued just evaluation of where you're at as a business and as an investor, just to continue just being fluid in all of that. I don't know. And is that kind of a theme that you sense for your own investment, just a lot of evaluation, or is that things that you feel? Yeah. Cause I feel like that's just such a theme that is the best way to do it. It's just evaluate.
One of the disciplines I've started actually this year specifically is creating an investment journal. And where I specifically try to at least once a week, if not more, journal and process through my thoughts about investments, either investments that I've made or that I am making. A lot of it comes back to processing through feelings and emotions that I have about, I'm excited about something, or I'm fearful of something, or I'm uncertain about something. And instead of taking action and buying and selling stuff, I will go in and I'll just write it out and process it and create that investment journal. And, which has actually been a process I've thoroughly enjoyed. And I've actually started sharing that too with some of our subscribers on our free email list, which has been a lot of fun. Again, you can sign up for that at investorinthefamily.com if interested. That was an unintentional plug, but applicable. But you're right. Keeping that journal, it's been very enjoyable and it's been a helpful filter for me to process some thoughts before taking action, and help me to kind of shape some investment thesis, that really helped me, I think, make some, what I hope to be really fruitful investments that I might not have done otherwise.
That's good.
Awesome. Hey, thanks so much, everyone. David, thanks for being here with us today. And as always, everyone, visit us at investorinthefamily.com. And thanks for joining us. And shoot us an email if you have any thoughts, questions, or suggestions. Brian, Brian, at investorinthefamily.com. And we'll talk to you next week. The information and opinions contained on this podcast are for educational purposes only. The information does not consider the economic status or risk profile of any specific person. The information and opinions expressed should not be construed as investment trading advice and does not constitute an offer or an invitation to make an offer to buy and sell securities.